what's your purpose? And it's like, holy crap, I don't know. But then we start to talk about it. And 45 minutes later, we've identified a lot of things. There's periods with high intensity where you're all invested, but there's also periods where you taper off. They could develop other areas of their life. They could focus on family. They could focus on developing a business. They could focus on a bunch of other things. We see autonomy as an important component. But I wasn't convinced that athletes have full autonomy in sport.
Hi there, and welcome to the Supporting Champions podcast. Now, my name is Dr. Steve Ingham, performance scientist by trade and training. And in these discussions with performance experts, practitioners, and performers, I explore how we deliver performance, how we support others to perform, and the underpinning knowledge and concepts at play. I really hope you enjoy the conversations from today's episode or from the back catalogue. And if you do, it'd be great if you can take a chance to like and subscribe to the channel, or for the audio, take a moment to leave a review. It really helps the show. Right, let's get into the discussion. Hi folks, and welcome to the Supporting Champions podcast. In this conversation, I speak to Lisa Trainor, who is a PhD researcher at Swansea University. Now, Lisa's expertise is all around the sphere of well-being, specifically in elite sport. And so there's different types of well-being, as Lisa will explain. How's it feel? That hedonic well-being and eudaemonic well-being, which is pursuit, flourishing, thriving, going somewhere. And so this is all about how do elite athletes experience well-being. And Lisa's captured some piercing insights as to what it means for elite athletes. And in this conversation, she takes us through the different components. I'll save those for the conversation and you can listen in. As you're doing this, I'd love for you to be thinking about the different ideas that Lisa surfaces for elite athletes and how they develop their well-being and what that means to you. Hope you enjoy the conversation. A warm welcome to the podcast, Lisa. Now, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Fantastic. Now, tell me a little bit about yourself. Give us a bit of a background. You've moved over to the UK from Canada, but that's kind of all I know. So I've invited you onto the podcast, and I'd love you to share your background with people.
Yeah, for sure. So sport's always been a big part of my life, and I decided that I wanted to pursue playing varsity sport at university in Canada. So that kind of kick-started my, let's say, academic career. Although at that point in time, sport was kind of the primary focus, as it is for a lot of athletes. And then I got interested in kinesiology, which we call it over there, so equivalent to sports sciences, and experienced an injury in my second year of my hockey career. And I was taking a sports psychology course at the time, so really kind of found interest and I guess a lot of applicability through that. And that's when my attention kind of turned to school and academics and sports psychology, and that really drove an interest in wanting to pursue a master's degree and then a PhD, and kind of here we are now. So I guess an overview is my research is situated in athlete well-being. It started in injury and well-being, and then kind of to take a step back and really look at what is well-being. So now I finished my PhD last year, and I've started my first post as a faculty member here in Swansea.
Oh, amazing. So in some ways the inspiration came from not being well, being broken, and it's shifted to how can we get well?
Yeah, I think at the time I was interested in kind of ill-being and well-being, and injury was a time where most often athletes don't experience well-being. But then kind of trying to look at, well, how is well-being hindered during that time? And what are steps we can take to potentially promote or help support injured athletes' well-being?
Okay. So recognizing that it's the context is you're on the back foot, but what can you do to maybe get to a place where you're coping a bit more effectively? And any insights and tips from your own experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do have to be careful as a researcher because you're interested in areas that you do have intimate experiences with, right? So I went into it thinking that injury is not an overly pleasant experience. but trying to take myself out of that and listen to athletes' experiences, which were not inherently pleasant, but also learning that injury can provide a lot of perspective and a lot of growth during that time. So there can be some, you know, kind of wrapped up benefits to it as well. So really taking a step back to kind of look at, okay, well, what can this experience offer me?
Yeah, so true. I mean, it's something that you can sort of change that conversation with athletes to say, hey, look, we've been trying to sort of get you to work on some of these weaknesses before. Now's the time to crack on with that. Turn these weaknesses into strengths, whether it's physical or mental. Now's the time we can channel some resource into some other areas that mean you've got momentum, you've got progress, you've got purpose, but you're also being tenacious in terms of addressing some of those those areas that aren't quite as strong. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's often the way that we present opportunity from. Yeah, it's not great for you, but it's actually now a chance for you to build.
Yeah, and it's hard to recognize that in the moment, but as time passes and you start to adapt, and this is the new normal, and what can I focus on now, and you have a bit of a timeline, often that's when you can see some of the progress start.
It's similar now. Now I noticed that you explored coping with postponement of the Tokyo Games, and how elite athletes managed with that change. What were your observations there? Were there some better skills and tools and perspectives that help people cope more effectively?
Yeah, I mean, at first, again, it's something that Olympians and Paralympians spend, 4 years of their life training for, and they're expected to perform and be there on this day. And the training program and the 4 years is so structured to that.
Yeah.
So the immediate reaction was obviously not good, right? Like you spend so much of your time and you pour your life into this, and now all of a sudden your timeline is shifted. So there was a lot of, I think there was a, what we noticed was there's a big a turmoil, right? You're kind of lost in what to do next. And we don't know what the next 6 months or year is even going to look like because we're in this period that we haven't experienced before. And I think the really interesting thing was that all athletes experienced this at the same time. And that's not often something that you get. Um, and I think upon reflection and kind of talking to athletes over time, because we talked to them a few times, um, it's that this was a forced break from sport, which you don't usually get. So everybody is, I don't want to say on the same playing field, but everybody's taken away from sport. So it's not like you have an injury and you're missing a few months or 6 months and everybody else is progressing. So it was actually, athletes kind of perceived this to be a time where they could focus on those other skills. They could develop other areas of their life. They could focus on family. They could focus on developing a business. They could focus on a bunch of other things. Um, there was some fears around maintaining their athletic abilities. So whether or not, it's kind of like I can't really judge where I'm at because I don't have a competition. I can't continue my regular training process. But it was kind of a welcomed, in a way, a welcomed break from sport. And how can we use this time now? I'm not saying that athletes enjoyed having the games postponed, but because it happened, they had to accept it. And so it's now what do we do? So I was looking for purpose in other areas as well as maintaining their athletic abilities. I think where it presented some challenges for athletes um, was that those who were thinking about retirement,
Yes.
and this is their last games, now it became a choice of, okay, now this is one more year of my life that I have to put into this, where I thought that this would be wrapped up in 2020. So that presented a lot of challenges, and I think that depended on where athletes were at in their career.
Yeah. Okay. Uh,
So it was
I
making,
suppose
yeah,
the random allocation of people are born in different years, and so they're going to peak at different times. Whether that time aligns to an Olympic Games is just chance. And for every person that perhaps was losing that sense of I'm at my peak, or this is an opportunity, or if it's ebbing away slightly, they're getting older, they're slightly less physiologically capable. Someone else would have gained from that. Another year maturer, another year.
Yeah.
Interesting. And any particular strategies that you felt that didn't help? That there was that sense of blame or external attribution, or I'm putting words into your mouth now, but were there any particular perspectives that didn't help?
I mean, there's immediate reaction of why me? Like, why does this have to happen at this point in time? So there was feelings of, I guess, a little bit of hopelessness to start.
Okay.
So I think it was how could you readjust your goals? Because you can't, this is happening, and this is happening to everyone. So if you're sitting here wondering, why me? Why does this have to happen? There's a little bit of self-pity. It's not going to help you. But athletes did talk about some struggles with motivation. So there's nothing to I don't know if look forward to is the right word, but there's no events in place. We don't know when we're going to get back. So kind of, it's not really, maybe a little bit of avoidance coping, but kind of just doing nothing because there was nothing to set your time to or to make goals for. So that was where athletes struggled a little bit. And then it was, realizing that, okay, we do have to readjust our goals. We do have to adapt to the situation. We don't know what's happening. Some of that, but it does take some time because it, again, is such a big part of their lives, right?
Yeah. I suppose it reminded me of the power of a goal, of a deadline, of a date with destiny, that's the day you're going to perform, and there's just drive and momentum and intensity every day to be able to accomplish that distal goal, that top of the mountain moment. But at the same time, I often get asked, that sense of the certainty for elite athletes, they benefit from that, whereas we're working all the time and we're having to keep momentum and keep motivation up and high. But at the same time, athletes, coaches, support staff are equipped with the mental skills to be able to manage, adapt, cope with the uncertainties and the what ifs. So it was a really interesting test case in that time, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's something that has never really happened before.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting moment in time to look at how we as a whole adapt to something so big and so beyond the world of sport, right?
Yeah. Interesting. And so we're sort of referring to sort of purpose and direction there. Well-being.
Yes.
Now we've discussed this on the podcast before, but it'd be really good just to help people set their understanding in terms of clarification of different types of well-being, and why both are important and crucial, and the differences in the context of high-performance sport too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've spent a lot of my last, 5 years with my head in different papers trying to get a grasp of what's out there and what these terms mean, and try to kind of sift through what's available. And I think what I've arrived at is I like to think of well-being as this overarching concept. It's kind of this umbrella term. And now where we have a little bit of a problem is that it's become such a popular term in daily conversations. So it kind of means everything and nothing at the same time. So when you ask someone, how's your well-being? It's like, well, I feel good. And, what else does that mean? And what does feeling good actually mean to you? But within the literature, I see well-being as that overarching concept. And then we have two different perspectives of well-being. So we have the hedonic perspective and the eudaemonic perspective. So to simplify that, hedonic well-being is really about feeling good. So it has that affective dimension. You're feeling good, you're feeling happy, you're satisfied with life. Um, so it's more about the immediate feeling in terms of, how we assess something right away. And then we can look at eudaemonic well-being, which still uses the term happiness, but uses it in a different way. So it's how are you functioning? And so that's an oversimplification to say feeling versus functioning. But it's essentially, do you have this striving purpose? Are you developing yourself? Are you searching for fulfillment? So it's um, this longer term, I guess, journey to reach this happiness, which we might never reach, but you're still living in that eudaimonic way. You're continually striving, there's growth and development. You're working through challenges, but it's all contributing to this sense of purpose and fulfillment. Um, and so I think that that's an important distinction, and not something that we always talk about or we always see within different things that we're reading. We often just see the term well-being. Um, so I think it's important to know what perspective we're talking about and what that means, because they do mean very different things. And then to your comment earlier, both are important for functioning. I mean, as humans, we need to feel that affective component. We need to feel good about things. But we also need to work through challenging situations to grow and develop and to reach this, greater perspective and greater um, kind of inner workings. So we can also look at, different definitions like what does mental health mean? And oftentimes in mental health, we see, you know, an optimal state of both um, positive functioning and positive feeling. So we see elements of both hedonic and eudaimonic well-being come up within those definitions. So again, mental health kind of being that umbrella term, and it's made up of different things like Hedonia, Eudaemonia, mental illness, and so forth. So I think it's learning what the terms mean, how you're using them, what you're looking at, what you're interested in. They're all useful, but it's just knowing where you're sitting, what you're reading, what information you're kind of absorbing.
And for people who are listening and encountering that for the first time, or revisiting that idea of hedonism and eudaimonic well-being, that do they sit separately? Is there an overlap? Are there clear differences and separation in terms of the things that might make you feel well and happy from
Mm-hmm.
I love doing this experience versus God, this is challenging me and developing me, but I'm engaged and there's an
Mm-hmm.
element of flow and development with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different schools of thoughts out there. From what I understand and what I read and where I feel kind of comfortable looking at the two is that they are distinct concepts, but they share substantial overlap. So they're
Okay.
contributing to one another. You need both to feel this, say, overarching well-being. So that's how I would view them. I think that there are things that you do that make you feel well right away. And there's things, like you said, that you engage in where you feel this deep sense of connection. So if we think about athletes going to training sessions all the time where they're physically strenuous, they don't necessarily feel good, but they're doing what we would call maybe a eudaimonic activity. They're engaging in something that means so much to them. So it's not inherently pleasurable, but it's contributing to their well-being. But I think you need a balance, or maybe I don't know
Yeah.
what the percentages are, but you definitely need both of them to contribute to the sense of well-being.
Yeah. Okay. Some some sense of, right, I've got this tough project to work through. It's taking me forward. I'm not going to
Hmm.
enjoy it.
Hmm.
That's a eudaemonic tick. But you know what? I'm going to take a break from that and go and do something I love and then come
Yeah,
back to it.
exactly. You're
um,
gonna go for a walk in the sunshine, or you're gonna order a pizza on a Friday night, right?
yeah, I think so. I suppose there is a little bit of a. My mind goes to that sense of tough training, and
Hmm.
people in the moment are anticipating it. They may be nervous about it. They then are. There's an element of struggle with that this is tough, and there's that internal narrative of, come on, push, or this is, I'm really struggling with this. But then there's that sort of deeper satisfaction afterwards. I've done that difficult thing, whether that is hormonally related or neurotransmitter related. Even within a single training session, there could be both benefits from hedonism and
Hmm.
eudaemonic well-being there.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Mm.
definitely. I mean, you could think about even just yourself or myself, let's say, because you go out for a run, and it's not like it doesn't necessarily, for me, it doesn't necessarily feel great at the time, but I get back and I feel a lot better. So there's things that, aren't inherently pleasurable, but are still good and make us feel better. I think just kind of trying to simplify it and put it into different contexts and different
Yeah.
understandings.
It makes me recall a conversation on the podcast with Costas Karagiorgio, talking about the benefits of music during
Mhm.
exercise and how it
Yeah.
adds to the euphoria, and particularly the euphoria experience towards the end of a training session. So that's quite a nice division for people to be thinking, what's taking me forward that I can nurture and make sure I'm aligning to and getting more of in my life, but also, am I doing things that are inherently pleasurable and interesting? And they don't necessarily need to um, sub, be the same in the
Hmm.
same activity, but they could complement each other.
Absolutely.
Is there any weighting in terms of their importance to human health flourishing, or is it context and person specific?
I'm not really sure. So I don't know that I can tell you what's out there. I mean, from a personal perspective, I think we need I think indi- I think the problem potentially with well-being is that it is individual specific, right? So we're not going to have this one size fits all for everybody. And that comes with some of the difficulties in trying to define and support and provide these kind of step-by-step frameworks. So I think it's different for everybody. I think there needs to be some sort of combination, but I think that's dependent on the person.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
And I'd love to tap into your insights then about what well-being means or how it's experienced by elite athletes. Would
Mhm.
your research in this area, I think, is really illuminating. But I'm curious to sort of get your perspective on whether well-being supports or is facilitative to elite athlete performance, or
Mhm.
whether you've been taking a look at this from, right, you're an elite athlete over here doing this crazy pursuit.
Mhm.
Are you well? Or
Mhm.
what does well-being mean to you? Or what would you like a little
Mhm.
bit more of in your life for
Yeah.
this to feel okay?
Mhm.
So it's sort of retrospective or whether it's facilitative. I'm just curious that being an elite athlete by definition is being an outlier and on the
Mhm.
extreme end of the normal population, and therefore it's not going to feel
Mhm.
normal by any constraints. So how did you approach the sort of research
Yeah.
paradigm?
Yeah, so I think to back up and maybe answer your question. So I've talked about we have these understandings of well-being and these different perspectives of well-being. So a lot of the so my work focuses on eudaemonia. I was interested in that kind of thriving, that fulfillment, that deeper purpose and pleasure. And so when I was looking through, what's out there, how do we conceptualize this? What are different models and theories and frameworks? These models, theories, and frameworks are um, global frameworks of well-being. So what that means is that these are context-free understandings of well-being. So these are just different areas of well-being that, or different understandings of well-being that are not tied to one specific context. So when I was looking at global definitions of eudaemonia, I wondered whether or not they would be applicable within a sport context. Because as you've mentioned, these athletes are outliers. They're situated within this performance context that has specific values, beliefs, attitudes, behaviors, where these are not necessarily, quote unquote, normal. So we look at high performance sport, and most often we think about performance. And so do athletes, right? Performance is key. Everybody wants to perform, everybody wants to win. And there's a lot of expectations and structure around them where you're expected to perform because that means you'll get funded. It means you'll get your spot on the team. It means you'll get more playing time. So everything is situated around performance. So then I started to ask I asked myself the question, can you have well-being in that context? And I wasn't sure. And then it was like, well, does well-being look different in that context? Or what's important? And then kind of taking a step back from that, it's like, well, we're always going to have this performance context. We're not getting rid of it. And it's an important element of sport, right? Winning, losing, it's part of sport. So what might well-being then look like in that context, because we're not getting rid of it? So that's kind of where my research came in, where I wanted to explore and talk to athletes about what does well-being mean to you in sport? What does it look like? And that's where I kickstarted my PhD research. I talked to almost 30 Olympians and Paralympians that were currently competing, and just asked them those questions. What does well-being mean to you? What does it look like? What are important facets that contribute to your well-being? Um, and I think working through that data, I think you can have well-being in the performance context. I think you can. And I think that athletes would agree that you can. Um, you can perform and be unwell, so you don't necessarily need to have well-being to perform. But I would argue, and with hearing athletes' experiences, that that's time sensitive. You can only do it for so long. Um, so that's where hopefully I would think that um, having an idea of what well-being means in sport might mean that this could promote more sustainable sport. It could promote um, longer, kind of more, I don't want to use the word successful, but it could maybe like more stable, consistent performance and well-being if we can manage that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that the phrase that I read in your research, athletes are inseparable from their sport context. I suppose that alludes to the fact that this competition, there competition between you and other teams or athletes, but competition for space, competition between your past self and your future self. You're looking for progress, and so it's intense or has an intensity to it. It's also very confronting in terms of you win or you lose, or you progress or you don't. And so am I hearing then, because of those that mix, that muesli of really quintessentially sport-based factors, that's got to be much more aligned to eudaemonia, because it has to attach to why you're doing this. You've chosen to do this. It's are there degrees of eudaemonia, i.e. you've engaged in this. There's a degree of happiness, but this is very purposeful.
I think, probably winning or successes in sport, I don't know, hitting PBs, you're feeling an initial sense of hedonism, right? You're feeling those
Okay.
positive feelings, or you lose and you're feeling really upset or really sad about it. But then I think there's room for the deeper, like you can win and you can feel great about it. So there's positive feelings, but then it's contributing to your growth and development and your purpose as an athlete. So I think it goes much deeper than that. So I think you can experience both in sport, but sport is like you're alluding to, sport is a tough place to be, um, with probably less pleasurable immediate gratification than that longer term kind of fulfillment and purpose. So that's another reason why I was interested in, what does purpose or fulfillment look like in sport? How do you get that? And almost more importantly, how do you get that if you're not winning? Because very, very few athletes are going to win,
Yeah.
right? Or
And
if we're thinking Olympic
yes,
gold.
we've all seen that clip of Roger Federer doing the rounds, his graduation acceptance speech, and he referred to, I think it was 54% of points that he won. So,
Yeah.
you know, 46% of the time he lost a point, but he won 83% of the matches. I mean, that's what makes him great. But that sense of in the moment it really matters, but afterwards it shouldn't necessarily.
Mhm.
Do you have a sense? Because I'd love to get into the specifics
Mhm.
of the factors that were identified, but I'd
Yeah.
love to just explore that concept of sometimes it doesn't feel great.
Mhm.
Was that more common that was in the moment of performing or the moments before you perform, um, versus the whole experience of preparation, intense training, goal setting, and so on? Was there any difference in terms of what people referred to of this doesn't feel good, whether that was time
Mhm.
specific rather than time sensitive?
That's a good question. I think it did differ a little bit for some athletes. Like some athletes just really loved performing. They absolutely loved
Right.
it. Um, where I think that a lot of the challenges was the lead up, right? Because they're living for this one moment. Yes, it's stressful, but there's a lot of pre-work that goes into that. It's time away from family, it's travel, it's hectic schedules, it's attending um, other competitions, and so I think it was a lot of
Yeah.
the day-to-day life of being an athlete that was kind of tough. It's oftentimes not as fun to go to practice, but go play the game on the weekend, right? But athletes, for elite athletes, that's 90% of their time that they're practicing or even more. Um, and then they get to perform at this event once every 4 years.
And so it'd be great for you to share some of
Hmm.
the headlines of what elite athletes mentioned. We should probably recognise that it's cross-cultural, cross-country.
Yeah.
So New Zealand, Canada, UK,
And
I
Australia.
think there's and Australia,
Yeah.
um, Olympic, Paralympic. So there's breadth to
Yep.
this, a Western perspective, but at least
Yes.
but multi country based.
Yeah.
What did you find? What did they say? What did they think? You
Yeah.
know what, this is important. Was there a hierarchy to the things that you found? I mean, was there
Okay,
a
this is
sense
a
of
question.
more common?
Yeah. This is a question that does get asked. And from my research, I can't tell you what the hierarchy is. I've
Ah,
identified areas at the most, and I think they're all important. And I don't know that I could argue that one is more important. I
okay.
think, again, like I said, that well being is individual specific. So I think that, so within my research, I've identified kind of 8 areas that potentially contribute to athlete well being. So
And so
that's in
before you
this.
mention those, then,
Yes.
this episode of Supporting Champions podcast is sponsored by Athlete Now, the perfect platform for sports practitioners looking to expand their reach. Whether you're a sports scientist, therapist, or coach, Athlete Now helps you showcase your expertise, connect you directly with athletes, and grow your business. With no ads, no commissions, and access to industry discounts, it's designed to make your services stand out. Join as a practitioner today to get listed, promote your services, and connect with athletes who need your support. And for athletes, it's free to sign up, giving you access to exclusive discount deals and direct connections with the best in the industry. Visit theathletenow.com to find out more. What would be your coaching point if people are listening to this and thinking about the 8? Do you think there would be a sense of, if there are a couple of questions such as, if something's missing for you, and when you're hearing it from Lisa, and you need that in your life, go and work on it. I'm just imagining like a life wheel type thing. It's just, is there a pie missing here? Or is there one that speaks to you that you think actually really need to lean into that? What would be your coaching, how people digest this?
Yeah, I would say, and I think when I'm thinking about this, because it's very exploratory work, we haven't really looked at what components might contribute or make up athlete well-being within sport. I think that this is a great starting point. I think there's 8 components here. I think working with athletes, potentially present them these 8 components, you can get them to identify what are really important ones for you. And then I think also, do we need to take something out? Do we need to adapt something? Do we need to add something? But I think this is a great starting point to say, hey, these might be important components to look at. Let's work together to establish what works for you. And then I think you can kind of look at the different components that are identified and say, okay, what might this look like? Where do we want to get to? Where are we at right now? So I think it provides a little bit of a starting point, a little bit of a tool to start working with athletes about well-being. Instead of going, hey, what does well-being mean to you? Period. And it's like, oh, I don't know. It feels good. I'm progressing, I'm performing, and then not really having a lot to work with.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what I think I would start with. But I mean, when we're talking about eudaemonia and I'm thinking about the 8 components, I think about purpose and fulfillment. And I'm thinking that those are 2 of the 8 components that I put down. And, those are, one would argue, fundamental to eudaemonia. We're striving for more. So I think it would also be assessing that this is, in fact, eudaemonia that we're talking about with an athlete and not hedonia or affect.
Okay. So give us the list, and then I've got one that I think has to be part of the conversation, but I'll save that to the end.
That's not on there.
No, it's on there. It's on there because in terms of hierarchy, just that sense of what are the things that you would be talking to an athlete about, what are the things that you'd be looking for in the conversations, and if there's one that I think if that was missing, I'd definitely be one that's starting to work on that first. But anyway, I'll save that to the end. Go on.
Okay. Do you want me to just talk through the 8?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I presented a bit of a graphic on what does athlete well-being look like, and kind of like this quick guide to what does the component mean and what are some protective factors that we could potentially work on with athletes. So the first component was self-confidence and worth, and I'm numbering them, but they're not in any order. So that component is self-confidence and sport worth. So athletes have to manage a lot of expectations, and oftentimes they're external expectations. So from coaches, sport organizations, funding agencies, so forth. And they're often contingent on performance. So athletes then could get in a position where they're basing their worth off of what other people are dictating or saying. And so what we were talking to athletes about is having this self-referenced self-confidence and sport worth. So having kind of it coming from internal or the inside. And protective factors could be having that self reference, trusting in your abilities, trusting in the process. So you're going through all this training, you're working with people that are experienced, that, work within the sport. And then having well-being based internally. So you're basing your own well-being, you're not letting others base your well-being. Yeah. And so that was kind of the first point. And the second area, the second dimension was having a personal balance. So athletes like to be 100% invested in sport because they're expected to put their life into it. They want to perform. So the prevailing belief is that if you don't spend 100% of your time on this, then you're missing an opportunity. But actually talking to athletes, getting perspectives, and I think it shifted based on where the athlete was at in their career, what they had already accomplished. That the balance is unique to each person. Athletes did agree that some people need more of a balance, some people need less of a balance. They also agreed that there's this ebb and flow nature. So maybe we're in a really, it's kind of, one athlete kind of talked about it almost being like her training program. There's periods with high intensity where you're all invested, but there's also periods where you taper off. So managing that balance, but doing it in a way that worked for you. I think as practitioners working with athletes, you want to say, you need this balance, you need other areas of your life, you need to go do this, but it has to come from the athlete. So it has to be athlete directed because otherwise it can cause this greater stress, this greater anxiety, and then all of a sudden athletes aren't feeling well.
That feels like as you mentioned, maybe a point of maturity to for somebody to have the wherewithal, experience, and trust the process to stop and say, training more at the moment or intensifying my focus on that split and that time or that conversion rate is not helping me. And so they get their heads up or they seek outside support or pursuing something else. That means then that they're refreshing or they're recovering and they come back more effective. I wouldn't say necessarily age, because I've met young athletes with a very mature perspective on that, but they've been through an experience that's helped them understand the importance of balance.
I was going to say, I think it comes down to the experience. And sometimes some athletes said that, people can tell me, and this is maybe more trusting in the process and focusing on that versus the outcome. But it kind of spread over a few dimensions, and it was, people can tell me it, but I almost needed to experience it to really believe it. And to be able to then shift and trust that. But it is interesting because, an athlete spoke about, I just wanted to be in sport all the time. I believed that that would lead me to success. And then I realized after the Olympic Games that it wasn't the case, that I actually needed to take a little bit of time away or balance that training a little bit, and then I would perform better. But it's not the narrative that we always hear.
It seems as though many of these will be interlinked or supportive for each other. I heard in that example there, self-worth, that if I attach everything that I'm experiencing and attach my self-worth to the results I'm getting, that's not healthy. Therefore, I need other things in my life.
Yeah. I think a lot of the dimensions, because we're in a performance-oriented context, are related to performance. I can jump ahead because performance is one of the components, and I struggled on whether or not, is this a component or is it just the environment? right?
Yeah,
Because
it's just
everything, and I say within the research that everything is shaped by performance. We're not getting rid of it. And so I think the way that I'm kind of thinking about performance here is almost a sense of accomplishment. So it's not just winning and losing, but it is this sort of progression, accomplishment,
okay.
because I think it has to be more than winning and losing, but everything is shaped by performance. So within that component, we talk about how we're in a performance environment, right? There's expected behaviors. You're expected to win at all costs. And like you said earlier within this conversation, athletes are expected to push through. That's not always the greatest action to, promote, protect, support their well-being, but that's what you're supposed to do. That's what high performance sport is supposed to look like. But it could come at a cost, and maybe again it comes with a limited timestamp. You can only do that for so long. So I
Mm,
think it's talking to athletes, and again, I don't think you can push this on athletes, but it's outcome versus process. It's yes, we want to pursue excellence, and I think that's something that we could all agree on. But pursuing excellence as a process doesn't mean that we're sacrificing, excellence as a result. But it's how do
love
we
that.
get there? How do we work there? It's easier said than done at sometimes. And I think I can look back on even, not I wasn't an elite athlete, but there's times where I felt like I just need to focus on the result. So I think it's easier said than done. But I think with experience, with conversation shifting, with, how do we do this? How do we make sure that we are still striving for excellence? That there can be a little bit of a head turn. Um, and that's where athletes said that, I know that it might be better for me, but it takes a lot of trust. And I fear that if I do that, I might not be getting the outcome. But we don't have data to say that it hinders outcome. We actually have stuff to say that, is probably better,
Yeah.
right? But
There's a
it's,
heartiness to it and the quote that I recall is from James Cracknell on the podcast, multiple Olympic champion, and he said we wanted to be world class at the things that require no talent. And
mm,
so that process, but also the pursuit of excellence, is going to be part of our enriched journey, um, irrespective of whether the results go our way. That's going to
mhm,
be part of us and how we do things. Like you
yeah,
say, that requires standards. It requires tough conversations.
yeah.
It requires maintaining that intensity.
Well, it requires self-acceptance as an athlete too. You're not always going to be perfect, and that's something that athletes struggle with, right? And there's a lot to it. I mean, yeah, I mean, I spoke with some athletes that had experienced that shift in perspective over their career and how they were in such a better place. And I mean, these athletes, and I think it kind of gets me thinking too about that maturity and experiences, but that had experienced multiple Olympic or Paralympic games. And they got to a point where they said, I can focus on that process. I am content with where I'm at. If I've given it my all, if I've done my best, then I'm happy. And I imagine that that is a really, really hard place to get to as an athlete. And it's not that you're accepting that you're not going to win or you're not going to be great, but that you're satisfied with what you've done. Which I think, even if you kind of shift the context in your business life or in different areas, how do you get to that point where you are satisfied with, maybe not being the best, but doing the best that you can do?
Hmm.
Yeah. So I thought it was really interesting.
I'm a student of athlete interviews post performance, post final. Um, I say student. I'm just engaged. No, I don't need a filter. Then I'm absolutely dialed in. And I thought for the first time, this is anecdotal and purely my subjective observation, I thought the Olympics last in Paris had a much stronger emphasis of
Mm,
I'm pleased. I'm pleased with the way
mhm,
I did things on my terms. I'm
mhm,
satisfied.
mhm,
Um, and I thought there was a real mix of responses like that for winners
mhm.
and second, third,
Yeah.
fourths. I
Mhm,
thought it was a real trend moving
mhm.
towards that.
Yeah, we see some of the narratives with like sporting organizations, national sporting organizations changing a little bit too, where it's like,
Yeah,
win well or, I think it was like pursuit of excellence. So we're looking at some terminology changing, maybe with a recognition that if you are well, it can be just as beneficial,
yeah.
or it can be, you know. So it
Although
is,
I've heard counter to
yeah.
win well to some people has sounded additive. We want you to win, and we want
And
you
we
to do
want
it
you to be,
well.
yeah,
Not
not
just
supportive.
not perform well, as
Yeah,
in perform in a way that you're proud. I think that's different. There was a real
yeah,
focus on being role models in Australia as a
yeah,
pursuit. That's the goal. Um,
yeah,
Whereas win well, I've heard being
yeah,
misinterpreted as an idea.
yeah, that's true.
Go
Yeah,
on, then, give us some more. Give us some more.
yeah. So we have aligned purpose. So I think that it was important that, I mean, we see purpose as a fundamental concept of eudaemonia, but I think having that aligned purpose where you're doing, because I guess I'll back up again, but athletes are in this environment where they often forgo a lot of their power, right? They put themselves in an environment where then other people are kind of in control. And we don't often see that in many other contexts. So I think it's important that athletes' actions, their values, their beliefs align to their purpose. So why are they participating in sport? Why are you doing this? What you're going through, what you're doing, does this align? Does it contribute to your sense of purpose in sport? Um, so having that kind of like those goals that align with your beliefs and continually working toward that. And then I think that's very closely intertwined with feelings of fulfillment. So again, another kind of fundamental concept of eudaimonia, right? That deeper sense of motivation. So I kind of, and I know I define it as almost this deep joy and happiness for participating, and not necessarily pleasurable, but this
Mm.
deep sense of meaning. So you're getting up every day, you're doing this because you love it, right? So it gives you this sense of fulfillment. Um, so it's satisfying your needs, and it's meeting kind of your personal priorities in sport. Are you doing this? Is this individual? Is it relational? Are you doing it for a sense of agency? Are you advocating? It's aligning with what you really believe in. So those are a couple that were really, I think, probably fundamental to kind of conceptualizations of eudaimonia.
Could I ask you about one of the bullet points on your paper?
Yeah.
One word under purpose was harmony and
Mhm.
coherence.
Mhm.
Um, could you just clarify that? Because I think sometimes elite performance is not harmonious. It's disruptive, it's complex, it's uncertain.
Right.
And so there's not a sense of cruising here.
Right.
Um, what's the
Right.
is it, or does it speak more to it's harmonious with me?
Yeah.
It's aligned with my thoughts.
Yes. So I'm talking more about the alignment of your purpose. So there's this harmony in the sense that kind of this is all interconnected. It's contributing to
Okay,
one another. But I think when we shift from that, it's not that. I think we shift to maybe another component that looks at psychological adaptability. And so we know that you're in this high pressure environment that is constantly changing, that is throwing you curveballs that you constantly have to adapt to. So I think that the harmony is the sense of like, I'm doing what I want to do. I'm here for the right reasons. my needs are being met, my values are aligned. So I don't think it's necessarily the environment, like the stimulus or the responses that you have within the environment, but that's kind of things in the background that are working together.
So you've mentioned psychological adaptability.
Mhm.
Is that covered, or does that need further just clarification?
Well, I think that coping in sport, we talk about, especially working with athletes, is a big component, right? We need to have this coping repertoire. And athletes are often faced with a lot of unforeseen challenges. Um, so I think that athletes need to be able to adapt. So that's an important part. It's important psychological skills that athletes learn. Um, just being able to manage that uncertainty, to reappraise events. It's like, this might not be the end of the world. What can I do now? And then I think the important dimension here, the important kind of um, caveat is that all these experiences then you kind of have in your back pocket. They contribute to being able to further deal with um, different high pressure situations. You also grow as an athlete from that, right? There's kind of like this sense of resilience and growth and being able to deal with more that's thrown at you. So maybe as a beginning athlete or a young athlete, you don't, you go to your first Olympic Games and it's absolutely terrifying. But then you enter the second one, you have more of an idea what's going on. You know how to manage the nerves around it. You know how to, like that sort of thing. But I think the growth element is kind of the interesting caveat there. And then I think I have two left. So I had a component around personal agency. So within a lot of the eudaemonic models, we see autonomy as an important component. But I wasn't convinced that athletes have full autonomy in sport,
Hmm.
right? We're often, like I said earlier, we give up a lot of control. Coaches have a strong presence in, what we do, the structure, the routine. It's coming from a lot of different people. But I think that it was important to the athletes talked about that they had a say. There was this active role. They weren't just
Okay.
passive in saying, you have to do this, you have to do that, and you don't get a say in any of it. But I think that it's important that athletes have a say. Yes, I think there needs to be expertise and there needs to be, I don't want to say some sort of control, but there needs to be some sort of direction from those that potentially, coaches and organizations and so forth. But athletes need to have a say. They
Hmm.
need to be able
Interesting.
to feel comfortable to speak up and have their needs met. Hey, this is not working for me. And I think about some of the Paralympic athletes that I spoke to, and it's like they were commenting on that disability is very individual, right? Not everyone's going to experience it the same. So maybe the training wasn't potentially working for them, but they didn't feel like they were in an environment that they could speak up and say, hey, I actually can't do another run. I actually can't do this because then I'm not going to be able to train tomorrow. So having a little bit of a kind of that two-way relationship.
Okay. So it's not personal agency in its fullest form as a pioneer. I'm going to go and do this. I'm
Yeah.
going to do what the hell I want.
Hmm.
It's more about engagement and the permission to be able to stop, pause, go, continue as needs be. And that is difficult, isn't it? As you say, because
Hmm.
you lock into a program and
Yeah.
there's expectations of
Hmm.
commitment, training, the amount of training that you do. You can't just rip it up and make it up. You've got to do what's required.
Hmm.
But that sense of I have a voice that feels quite important. That you'd come away from your training session thinking that you've shaped tomorrow.
Hmm. And also that, you're cared about as a human being beyond an athlete, right? Like
Yeah.
your your input is valuable, right? We're working together to reach this optimal functioning. Um, so yeah, I think there's importance there in having ability to have kind of a say. And
And
then
that leads nicely into the final one,
yeah,
really, doesn't
into
it?
the last one, which is psychologically safe relationships. So we see within other eudaemonic models kind of like meaningful relationships or positive relationships, but I think within sport, where again athletes, forgo that control. There's a hierarchy in kind of power relationships. We're asking athletes to do a lot. Performance is important. Having those inclusive and safe environments, so having those psychologically safe environments for athletes, because they are pushing themselves to the limits. And I think one of the biggest things that came up for athletes was that they felt scared to, like, it was fear based. They felt fearful to push their limits because if they didn't succeed, and this is even in practices and in training, if they didn't have a desirable outcome, it's they were fearful of the consequences. And so that kind of leads to that, I kind of had like there's almost conditional support sometimes. It's like if an athlete succeeds, okay, we support you. If an athlete doesn't succeed, as in, win or whatever, we don't. So I think having that unconditional support to promote the development, the further pushing of boundaries for an athlete is really important, especially if we want them to try to take those
Mm.
steps. So I don't think it's just um, positive relationships or meaningful relationships, but I think they need to be psychologically safe. Yeah.
Yeah, it speaks again to that importance of the coach-athlete relationship. Again, referring back to Sophia Jowett's conversation on the podcast, and that connection, but an agreed way of working. And so you've alluded to the fact that some of these these concepts or these factors might be stronger as you develop and mature as an athlete and as a performer. Were there any differences within groups? The one column that made me think, oh, I wonder if there's a difference there was team sport versus individual. And I know that a sample size of 3 male Paralympians might not necessarily allow you the power to conclude. But were there any sort of sub trends that you noticed?
Yeah, I think it was. I often actually get asked the question between Olympians and Paralympians, and I would say that I don't think that there's differences, and this is not quite your question, but I don't think that there's differences in components of well-being. So I don't think that
Okay.
there's different dimensions, but I think that the way that we're able to fulfill the dimensions is potentially different. We're not on an equal playing field. We all don't have the same amount of access to resources, to funding, money, and so forth. So I think the way that we're able to then go on and fulfill the components differs between different subgroups. Um, I think within the literature, we see within some of the conversations with athletes, I mean, if you're in a team sport, you have teammates that you're working with, that you can collaborate with, that you can have those relationships with. Where often in individual sports, your teammates are also your competitors. So there's some differences in that sense where maybe you didn't have as much of a group and support around you in kind of those relationships. But I wouldn't say that the dimensions change all that much.
No. Okay.
Mhm.
My bold statement about I think there's one that's really important. It
Tell
shifted
me.
a little bit whilst I was hearing. I was thinking, oh, that's a great. Oh yeah, you should have a bit of that in your life for each one of them. But I have gone back to it, and I think it is more of a reflection of perhaps where we are now, the zeitgeist, as much as the absence of this over the decades has probably been an injustice for athletes. It's something we've let people down. We haven't promoted this enough over the years, and that is the importance and prominence to promote self-worth. That I sort of feel to a certain extent that some athletes I've worked with over the years, and this is me identifying that this is a spider graph,
they haven't got purpose. They don't care. They just want to win.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They haven't got any values.
Yeah.
As much as you might ask them, they haven't got balance.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think has really undermined their happiness and health and flourishing is the lack of self-worth independent of their sport, that they're hollowed out after they've finished performing.
Yeah.
And that doesn't feel like a good thing from a moral and ethical point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one that I think that we should be promoting, and we should be encouraging those sorts of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So there's my case for the defence for that. What's your response?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, over the years of talking to athletes about well-being and different levels of athletes, so those at the varsity level and those at the elite level, I think that a lot of times they bring up confidence. And then as they start to talk about confidence, I hear a lot about worth. Um, and I think that we're just I it's so external, right? And we're taught that it's contingent on this. So those are just the beliefs going forward. And kind of what you're speaking to, and a bit that's come up is it's important to have worth beyond sport too. And so that can be a protective factor when something happens, like injury or retirement or transitions. Um, but that's hard to convince athletes that this is important, or you want to take care of this now because it will help you then. It's they want to focus on the moment, how can I do better? But I think a good way to sell that is let's build your confidence. This will build, this will then build this, and this will help you perform maybe more consistent, and you can go out there and you can believe in yourself. Um, but I don't know that it would be the most important. I think I would still try to delve into at least a couple of them.
On personality, and maybe this just shows my biases on personality tests that I've done over the years. I've always routinely come out very high on self-worth. I believe in myself, and sometimes I think that can overspill, but sometimes it can hold me as I'm stepping out of my comfort zone. So maybe it's my bias. So just lastly, Lisa, because it's fascinating and I really appreciate the conversation, but and in full respect to your disclaimer of this is what athletes have said has helped and supported their eudaemonic well-being. Developing your self-confidence, self-worth, personal balance, aligned purpose, fulfillment, I'm reading now, performance, personal agency, psychologically safe relationships, psychological adaptability. What's your sort of top tip for people who want to start to develop this and explore this for themselves, understanding that if this relates to work or if this relates to your hobbies, it might not all map across, but they all feel like a hearty start point for you to develop. What would be your top tip about how to get started to develop their eudaemonic well-being in this way?
Yeah, I think it's there needs to be some contemplation, right? So it's asking yourself questions. What do you want? Why are you doing this? What makes you feel happy? Why do you get up? Why do you get up and do that every day? What is your purpose in that? And these are big questions, right? Like sometimes I would ask athletes, what's your purpose? And it's like, holy crap, I don't know. But then we start to talk about it. And 45 minutes later, we've identified a lot of things. So I think it's just continually reflecting on it, refining. I mean, this is a process, right? You're not going to think about it and then you're going to have eudaimonic well-being next week. This is a lifelong process. I mean, it's a journey to having kind of that long-term well-being, continually striving to grow and develop, to reach your potentials. And I think, there's, like I said, no recipe, but I think it's contemplation. It's asking yourself a lot of questions. It's reflecting on what you're doing, how you're feeling, how these pieces fit into your life.
Amazing. I love that. on a tough bike ride, I'm always wondering, why am I doing this? But on a great day when the sun is out and the green grass and the blue sky, I'm thinking this is making me feel well. Lisa, thank you so much for the conversation. Where can people follow along? It'd be great for us to be able to provide some resources on the show notes, such as the graphic or put the link to the paper. Is that okay for us to do?
Yeah.
Fantastic. And follow you on Blue Sky, at least. I know you're on there too.
Yeah.
Lisa, thank you so much. Thanks so much for the conversation.
No, it was my pleasure. I'm always happy to chat well-being.
Hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you did, please take a chance to press like and subscribe to the channel. And for audio, please do leave a review. Thank you.